All right, let's see who remembers anything. Let me get to the right section. Give me one of the two foundations of progressive philosophy. I heard Obama speak, which is a painful thing to do. But he openly said, I'm a progressive Democrat, and not ashamed of it or something like that. It was a shocking thing to see a Democrat that's honest. No fixed truths. There's, especially no Bible. You can't acknowledge God. Historicism. The past really doesn't apply today. And out of that, I gave you a list of ideas that grew out of that. And then we looked at a bunch of changes on the national, state, and local level that we get out of this progressive era. Then we started into the presidents of this progressive era, and I'd like to continue along with that today. We started with Roosevelt and with his domestic affairs, and business and labor was the first. And there primarily we talked about how he's a trust buster. He's called the trust buster because he did break up a lot of companies, especially in respect to what had happened before that point. But he also does, especially later in his presidency, began to distinguish between big companies and bad companies, and wanted to make sure that labor wasn't exploiting big business and big business wasn't exploiting labor. Tried to make sure it's a little more fair. All right, then we talked about the muckrakers. Who are they? Yep.
The writers.
The writers? I thought you said rioters for a second, but they're trying to instigate riots. Writers, okay. Anything else?
Everything is wrong with the world.
Okay, can only see bad. All I can see is evil in the world. All right, and we gave you some examples of this group of writers who could only see bad, collectively referred to as the muckrakers. And we talked about natural resources a little bit, where Roosevelt began setting aside large tracts of land as national forest out in the West, a practice that we've just continued to add to that in a crazy way today. So, all right, let's talk about foreign affairs now. I have beside that his foreign affairs philosophy. Anybody know that? It's in all kinds of cartoons and things.
Speak softly and carry a big stick.
Yeah, speak softly, carry a big stick. You don't have to blab your mouth and tell everybody what you're going to do. Just say it softly, and if they don't pay attention, whack them in the head with the big stick. Speak softly, carry a big stick. All right, there's several places where things come up around the world that he's involved in. The first is the Panama Canal. The Panama Canal. Anybody know what country that's in? Close. Close. Romania? All right, the canal through Panama. All right, a quick little background. We'll get up to what we're doing here. This canal had been in the works for a very long time. The French had come to try to build it, and it had gone south for them. So there's this ongoing program to try to build this canal. Eventually, England and America get involved. And then eventually, by the time we get to this point, America's wanting to take over this thing directly. No more of this joint international coalition. We're going to come and build the thing. So right around the turn of the century, under Roosevelt here, we have America approach Colombia, which that might sound strange, because at that point, what is now Panama was part of Colombia. So we approached Colombia with this treaty that would give us the authority and the right to build this canal across Panama. All right. That gets turned down. Colombia will not go with that. They just reject it. A little bit later, something happened that bears on this. In 1903, November the 3rd, 1903, if you want a particular date, Panama revolted against Colombia. Right, so that little green section there, they revolted, trying to declare their independence and separate from Colombia. Roosevelt here sees an opportunity. Right, he's wanting to build this canal. So when Panama declares their independence and starts this revolt, he immediately comes to their aid. He sends warships down to the area. On November the 6th, 3 days later, he recognizes Panama as an independent country separate from Colombia. Okay, so he steps in very quickly to help this revolt be successful. Once that is done, then Panama gives us permission to build this canal, and we do that. We start building in 1904, or continue the project that had been started, and finish in 1914. It is still a very significant thing today, a little bit obsolete as far as military uses are concerned, because it won't handle some of the larger ships that we have today. But still a very important thing.
When did you say the canal was finished?
1914. All right, so there you can see his big stick. Saw an opportunity, he acted very quickly to secure Panamanian independence, and then through that, he gets to build the canal. All right, so Panama Canal. The next thing is the Roosevelt Corollary. Roosevelt Corollary. If you're checking stuff, Jacob, please do it later. Just so you keep swiping your other screen. All right, Roosevelt Corollary. This is an extension of the Monroe Doctrine. Who remembers the Monroe Doctrine? Who wants to tell me about it? Your hand's up first.
It was a statement that no European nation would interfere in the acts of the New World.
Okay, and there's the other side of it. We didn't want them to come here, and we wouldn't go there. If you guys want to kill yourselves, we'll watch and sell you the weapons, but we're not coming over. And the other way. So stay out of that. So he issues a corollary, if you remember from geometry class, after you stop sweating and panicking. A corollary was just an extension to a theorem. You state some theorem, and this was kind of like a logical conclusion based on that theorem. So this is his corollary, an extension of this Monroe Doctrine. All right, and what he said here in his corollary was that if some intervention needed to happen in Central and South America, America would do it. Right? I mean, if there were some cases of legitimate beefs where some country owed some European country a bunch of money, and Roosevelt was saying, we'll go down and we will arrange things to get you paid back or handle whatever the situation was, not them. So he was trying, his extension. America would do the intervening if it was needed. So the Roosevelt Corollary. The particular incident that brought that up was a debt. There was Venezuela had a change of government, and the new government wasn't going to honor the debts that the country had incurred under the old government, which wasn't especially a novel thing. It's happened many times. And the countries that they were owed money were in the process of sending ships and things there to collect the money that was owed them. And he said, no, wait a second. We will go down and we will make sure they pay you. So that was a particular instance, but that type of idea. If there was intervention that needed to happen, America would do it. Okay, so the Roosevelt Corollary. The next three things here all happen in the Far East, China, Asia, that part of the world. All right, the first one is in China, the Boxer Rebellion.
How do you spell that?
B-O-X-E-R. No, just like, sorry, but it is what it sounds like in that case. Boxer Rebellion, the basic thought here was it was an attempt by the Chinese to drive out all foreigners, just get them all out. The Chinese culture was being challenged and changed by this Western influence, and it had been the same culture for hundreds of years without really any significant change. And they were wanting to preserve that. So it was an attempt to kick all of these people out. Lots of people get killed. A lot of Westerners get killed. Some missionaries. Jonathan Goforth was one that was killed in this Boxer Rebellion. So anyway, bloody revolt eventually gets settled. America and some other countries do send some troops over to help, but it's not like Roosevelt just invaded and took over the country. It gets settled. Mostly I mention it because it happens here while he is president, this Boxer Rebellion. All right, the next thing is the Russo-Japanese War. This is the war between Japan and Russia. All right, this thing starts in 1904. And Roosevelt gets called in to negotiate a peace treaty between the two countries. And he does. They actually meet in New Hampshire. The Japanese, the Russians, and him, and they negotiate this thing, and it gets settled by treaty in 1906, September of 1906. Yep.
Why would two nations like Japan and China call in American leaders?
They were, I was trying to decide how far to go in this. Japan was wanting out of this thing. They didn't think that if it drug out, they would have any chance. So they just went out. So they approached Roosevelt without Russia knowing, trying to get him to come in and volunteer. If you guys want to negotiate this, we'll settle it. But they wanted some outside force, some neutral arbitrator, really. So.
But wasn't Japan winning the war at that point?
But they were. I'm trying to remember now the details. I don't have them here. There was some other things going on, and they were wanting out of it. I don't remember the details. Stephanie's not here like she remembers.
So they were winning, but they couldn't last long with Russia.
Yeah, that's.
Huge.
I don't remember any details beyond that, but I know Japan was. They approached him, and they didn't want Roosevelt. They didn't want the Russians to know about it. So there's a little delicacy involved. So.
I should just keep going. The revolution would take it over and it would have won.
Yeah, just keep pressing. All right, so anyway, the Russo-Japanese War, he helps negotiate that thing. That's the end of it, or the final thing. He wins the Nobel Peace Prize for this. At least he actually did something. Obama won one. He gave some speeches. I don't know if he hadn't done anything. It's kind of strange to think about the Nobel Peace Prize being associated with peace. But in this case, it was. Russo-Japanese War. All right, the last thing here, I have this underneath the Far East, but it really applies to more than that, but it's here. It's the Great White Fleet. America, at this point, is just coming onto the world scene. We had done very well in the Spanish-American War, which we just talked about. We were beginning to at least have enough respect in the world that Japan and other places, they thought of us as the party to negotiate. So we're just coming onto the world scene here. And to bolster that and to try to solidify a position of authority and power, Roosevelt sends this fleet around the world. It's called the Great White Fleet because it was painted white. He was intentionally wanted it to be very striking and to grab your attention when it sails into harbors. And it sails around the world. Leaves in 1907 for that thing and took a 2-year trip around the world. Stopping in harbors, just, all around. It was a group of 16 battleships, and it was just America through Roosevelt, just wanting to let the world see. This is part of our Navy. We have enough Navy that we can send these guys around the world and let you gawk at them. It was just him trying to show off that big stick. That's the way you want to think about it. So, Great White Fleet. The Navy does get a slogan out of this. Join the Navy, see the world. All right, so from that. All right, Great White Fleet. Questions on that?
I was going to say anchors away.
Oh, yeah, no. All right, Theodore Roosevelt. Let's look at the next president, Taft, William Howard Taft. He was the guy that Roosevelt wanted to be president next. I mean, he had to go through the election, et cetera, and all that kind of good stuff. But this was the guy he wanted to be in next. Anybody remember where we saw him prior? It's actually after this point, but we saw him prior to this lecture.
He was governor of
I'm sorry, no, it was before this, but anyway.
the Philippines.
Philippines, governor of the Philippines. He was the first governor of the Philippines. Great big man, 6 foot tall, 300 pounds. Who's 6 foot tall in here? I'm right at 6 foot. 300 pounds? Close? 250? Hey, he's a good sized man. Let's leave it there. All right, just like let me give you, he comes in 1908, serves one term. He loses in 12 to Wilson. Serves one term. All right, we'll do the same split up domestic and foreign affairs with him, although there's not as many things to talk about necessarily here. All right, domestic things. First here is the tariff. Who remembers what we saw with the tariff issue in the late 1800s? It was one of the issues.
They kept raising it, like the McKinley tariff was huge.
Gigantic. It was passed right around 1900, 1899. But the push was for a high tariff. All right, all through that point. Looks like that's okay. So, all right, at this point, there begins to be a desire to lower a tariff, which is really is a good idea. Taft here actually calls a special session of Congress together to address this tariff and try to get it lowered. They do get a tariff out of this special session. It's called, if you want it, the Payne-Aldrich tariff, Payne, and then Aldrich, Aldrich. They do get a tariff out of this thing. The House bill lowered tariffs significantly. When it got to the Senate, they do what they do today still. They attached a bunch of amendments to it, 847 amendments to this bill. All right, so the end result really, once it comes through the sausage grinder of Congress, the end result really is no significant changes in the tariffs. They lowered it, and then the Senate put an amendment in that raised it for a particular case and another particular case. And by the time you get 847 particular cases, there's not much real change. So anyway, there was a desire for this thing, but the end result that comes out of Congress is no significant changes. So at least there's a desire for lower tariff. All right, the second thing is regulation of business. This is something we talked about already. Roosevelt is called the trust buster because he begins to break up these large companies. Taft does twice as many as Roosevelt, which in itself is pretty, is significant. But if you think of the fact that he only served one term and Roosevelt essentially served two, all right, he prosecutes twice as many of these things. He does it enough that the Supreme Court actually begins to issue some rulings restraining some of these trust-busting actions. And they issued what was called the rule of reason that Taft didn't necessarily argue with, but the rule of reason basically said there had to be some reason. I mean, you can't just say, oh, there's a large successful company, let's prosecute them and make them split up into pieces. There's got to be some reason. So the Supreme Court actually begins to step in and restrict that thing a little bit. So regulated business. So Taft initiates lots of these lawsuits. We're going to see that change. Once we get to Wilson, Congress creates a separate bureaucracy to handle this thing. Rather than it really being up to the president to decide when to prosecute or when not to prosecute, they set up a separate entity. But at this point, it's still essentially his prerogative. So, all right, so we continue this regulation of business process that unfortunately we have today. All right, next is conservation. We saw under Roosevelt him setting aside land and that type of thing. And basically he continues that. He sets aside more land, more resources, more of this conservation effort. And again, I would love to go back to what they did and just have the government sell off. Wow. Put the money on the debt. Just sell it. I'd love to go back to here. So there's no... anyway, we have gotten very, very much carried away with it. So sometimes Taft is criticized for not doing this, but he really did. The reason he didn't do it is he got rid of one of Roosevelt's key guys in the conservation world, a guy named Gifford Pinchot. He was, it'd be like, wow. Would be a good example today. Firing Bill Gates or something, and people say, "Oh, you must hate computers." He was known for this issue, and Taft gets rid of him. So some people say, "Oh, he didn't pursue it," but he really did. He continued the policy. So, all right, last thing for domestic affairs is the income tax. It comes along while he's president. it was an amendment, so it goes through a completely different process, but is approved while he is president. Okay, so domestically, really, the short of it is a lot of the same type of things, essentially, other than the tariff. All right, the other thing to talk about him is foreign affairs. And there's just one thing I want to mention under his foreign affairs. All right, Taft disagreed a little bit with Roosevelt's big stick philosophy. I just saw this. Maybe he was a little sensitive to, big. I don't know. You guys have something in common. I mean, he didn't like the big stick philosophy or approach to foreign affairs. His approach is referred to as dollar diplomacy. And what he tried to do was use America's economic might to put pressure on these countries. And he tried to get American businessmen to invest in foreign countries, and that shared interest, those countries wanting to do well and being able to prosper, with these American businesses, trying to use that to create stability and to draw these countries together with us. So a little bit different philosophy. This one did not work especially well. Can anybody think why a businessman might be a little bit hesitant to take his money and invest it into a country that's not especially stable? Yeah, because the country is not especially stable. They could lose it all. Right? So this is not as successful as he was hoping, mostly because of that. This was a risky thing for businesses to do. On paper, it sounds kind of nice. Oh, yeah, we'll all be happy together. But, the businessmen drug their feet on this. So dollar diplomacy, not the best thing. All right, questions on Taft? Woodrow Wilson. I keep forgetting these things. I took them to my last class. I forgot to pass them out. I'll put them there. Hopefully I don't forget. All right, Woodrow Wilson, next president here in this progressive era. He's the last one. He comes in 1912 and is there through 1920. There might be some other world event that strikes you as taking place during that time, I hope. World War I. So he is the president through World War I. So I've got a little bit about him right now, and then the next topic is World War I. I have that as a separate topic rather than try to fit it into Wilson's foreign affairs or something. So really, he is the president through that whole thing. But for now, we'll talk about those things. Wilson. If you want to do foreign and domestic, or domestic and foreign, you can. There's just a few domestic things and one main foreign thing we're going to talk about. So first, a couple of domestic things. The first one there is the Federal Reserve Act. What part of the economy did this deal with? The Federal Reserve Act.
Part of what?
The economy. Matthew's hands up first.
Currency.
Currency. Currency, banking. Good catch. Are you left-handed?
No, I'm right-handed.
Ah, it's even better catch. All right, deals with banking. Okay, let me. This Federal Reserve Act comes in 1913. It does two things. The first is it handles the affairs of the national government, the banking affairs of the national government. I filled out my tax returns last night. It was a great, joyous thing to do. The tax return will come back and the check will come from this Federal Reserve Bank. Right? So they handle all those transactions. All right, the other thing it does, and this is a little bit my short version, thinking on it, this Federal Reserve acts as a bank for banks. Right? For a lot of the things that we go to a bank for, this Federal Reserve serves those functions for banks. Again, it's a little bit of a simplification, but I think that at least gives us the flavor. If you need money for a school bill that you can't pay, you can go to a bank and get a loan, and they will give you the money to pay the school bill off. Right? Banks, when they get into a position where they don't have enough cash on hand, Michael comes in to withdraw his $20,000 that he's got in the bank in town. Right. They might not have that $20,000 sitting in the vault. They would. It's not. But if they started to run out of money in the vault to give to people, they would go to the Federal Reserve and they would give them a loan. to replenish their reserves is the term for that. So a lot of the same types of things that we do at a bank, this Federal Reserve does for banks. So I have that handles the banking affairs of the United States and serves as a bank for banks. So two other things to mention. I have this kind of under the serving as a bank for banks. Two other things this Federal Reserve does through the banks is it controls, or at least influences the amount of money in circulation. Not always is it as blatant as just printing more money and passing it out to people, but it can be that blatant. Right? They can monkey with different things and cause more money to be circulated and monkey back on those things and cause money to come back to the banks and be deposited in banks instead of used out there. So they control the money in circulation, not the job. They need to provide a stable economy, a stable currency, not that type of monkeying. Does anybody know a way that they do that?
Sometimes they burn bills that are overused or have become unlivable. And they destroy them.
Okay, yeah, that's true, but I'm knowing that would just be replacing. They take old bills and print new ones and replace them. I'm going to share a little bit.
I know when they do come out with new bills, they will pay more for the old ones to get them out of the cycle, so to say. And they become more worth.
Yeah, I'm going to hold on to my old bills. Matthew, I might not give you another one. You already got one, but
They will, a lot of times they'll buy a bunch of gold, raising the value of gold in the free money market. That means their dollars worth more, or they'll sell gold, making it hard to invest. They kind of that way.
okay. There is a whole series of actions that they do along that line, not just buying gold, but sometimes buying bonds. They'll issue bonds, which essentially they would give you a piece. Why don't I always pick on you? They'll give you a piece of paper, and you'll give them $1,000, so that $1,000 then is not available to use, so they can retract the money supply that way, or they could buy the piece of paper back from you and give you $1,000, and it puts the money back into the economy. So they open market operations is what they're called. So, all right, the point is they can meddle with the money supply. If you hear every now and then they'll talk about the Fed meeting and making a decision or doing something, lots of times they're tinkering with that. Right? The other thing that they tinker with, the second thing, is they control the interest rate. And this is kind of, they can't just dictate to the bank in Chesterton, this is what you charge for interest on a house, but when banks go to the Federal Reserve for money, they get charged a certain interest rate, and they can raise that, right? Which then the banks typically have to match that. If they're getting charged money, then they've got to raise it higher. So the Federal Reserve has kept that thing at basically zero for a long time. That'd be a really nice arrangement to borrow money on. You give me $10,000, and in 20 years, I'll give you $10,000 back. No interest at all. All right, that's been zero. Which that's why we've had interest rates so low. Which probably, I don't know. Anybody go get a mortgage recently? Enjoy the low interest rates. You might not have noticed, but they've been extremely low. The Federal Reserve just bumped that thing up, and I forget, 0.1 or 0.2% interest or something. So, control the interest rate. Now, recently, this is not in my notes here, they have done what they call quantitative easing, QE1 and QE2 and QE3. Anybody heard phrases like that? And that is literally just printing money and distributing it to people. They don't make it, that sounds really ugly. They make it sound much better than that. Quantitative easing, that's better than printing money. But they're literally, in the end, just making new money and distributing it to people to stimulate the economy. So, all right, enough said. Federal Reserve, the federal government has no business being able to meddle that way in the economy. It's not their job. So, anyway, Federal Reserve, that comes in 1913. All right, the next thing for Wilson is the Underwood Act. Anybody know what the Underwood Act gave us? There's a mini Reese's peanut butter cup on the line here.
What year is that?
Do I want to tell you? I don't actually have the year here. Right in this time frame. Nobody knows? Okay. It established the first income tax. We had a constitutional amendment that made it constitutional. This is the law that actually came through Congress establishing a income tax. The top tax bracket was 6%. 6%. Wow. It has been up around 90%. Right now it's about 34%, that top tax bracket. Oh well. It's an incredibly stupid way to tax. The way our income tax works, as you make more money, you pay a higher percentage. So on this initial one, on the from $3,000 to $20,000, you paid 1% of that. The first $3,000, nothing. From $3,000 to 21%. From $20,000 to $500,000, you paid 2%. And if you were in the 1% at that point, above $500,000, you paid 6% of that. So as you make more money, the government hammers you harder and harder on that money. And if you imagine that top bracket being 90%, if you continue working after you hit that point, the government takes 90% of the money away from you. And that's just the national level. That doesn't count sales tax and other things, just the national level. So it's not worth it. That was Reagan when he was a movie star. There were several years he just quit working. Why am I going to pay 90% in taxes? He didn't need the money. So, but anyway, it's an incredibly stupid way. We wouldn't accept this anywhere else in the world. Imagine if the NBA had some sort of progressive rule structure, and the teams that made it to the playoffs the year before didn't have a three-point shot or something. Or, they just had these extra rules to make it harder on the more successful teams. We'd all say, that's stupid, that's insane. And this is also stupid and insane. So anyway, Underwood Act, it was the act that gave us the first actual income tax. It was made constitutional by the amendment, and this is the law that came through Congress. All right, one more thing here with this domestic things. The Federal Trade Commission, this is 1914. This is a government bureaucracy that took over the trust busting, basically. Rather than have the president and his administration directly deciding how much they'll pursue these things, they set up this separate entity, the Federal Trade Commission, to do that. So we go from an elected president to unelected bureaucrats who make these decisions. So, FTC. All right, questions about that? I got to come up with some questions that you guys know the answers to. All right, the last thing for Wilson at this point is Mexico. This would be a foreign affair if you wanted to split it in your notes. Mexico. All right, we're not going to go through the whole soap opera of rulers and challenges to the rule and all kinds of great Mexican names that you need to try to remember for a test. We're not going to do that. But at this point, in the early 1900s, this sounds strange, Mexico was an important source of oil for America. And so there's some real economic ties there that we were involved with. So we had a cause to be concerned. Not quite to the same extent today, but if you think of the Middle East, why are we concerned about that? Well, it's the oil. I mean, and the oil is important. If you ever think, who cares? Oil's not that big a deal. Just go ahead and live without it. Don't use no gas, no diesel, no motor oil. Should we throw natural gas in there? It's a fossil fuel. No natural gas. I mean, if you think of all this, how it affected. So anyway, they were important to us economically, so we were concerned and paying attention to what happened there. In 1911, they have a revolution. This new guy comes in, takes over, becomes very aggressive. Then he gets murdered, and another guy takes over, and he's really nasty and vicious, and begins, killing people, begins taking property from American property that was in Mexico. So there's these this ongoing political problems and American property getting damaged and taken in that. So that puts pressure then on the U.S. government. They're destroying, taking American property. And as that happens, things build. By 1914, we stop some ships approaching Mexico that are loaded with weapons. Things boil over in 1916 when a man named Pancho Villa, V-I-L-L-A, Pancho Villa did something. And what did he do? Oh, that was a raised hand. I saw it. Did you guys see that? Olivia raised her hand. This is a moment to note. What did Pancho Villa do? You gonna make me give it to Stephanie?
He crossed the Texas border and he killed 17 Americans.
Yeah, he actually crossed into America and attacked a couple of towns across the border. All right, so it's 1916. Two different places. Across the border, killed some people. I have the first place was 17, and the second place 18. But so here we have one of these, quasi-government connected Mexican revolutionaries involved in all this political turmoil, crossing the border and attacking and killing Americans. We respond, and I think very justly so, by wanting to stop this. So Wilson puts together a body of troops, about 6,000 troops, to go capture Pancho Villa. And things were going very bad here, politically wise, or at least with the tension. Pancho Villa keeps fleeing deeper and deeper into Mexico, and our forces keep chasing after him, and the government that was there begins to get very worried about these 6,000 troops invading Mexico. Really, this is in 1916. All right. This series of events isn't allowed to finish up because something else intervened. World War I intervened. By January of 1917, Wilson pulls the troops out because there are literally bigger fish to fry who were getting sucked into World War I at that point. But anyway, it was getting kind of ugly and was heading in a bad direction. All right, so Mexico. Questions there? Anyone want to go back through all of the Huertas and the Carranzas and missing some other names? Madero. So. He wouldn't know what it was like to live in a free country, though. I mean, Canada right now, I think, is freer than us. We're going to be going there for freedom. Okay. Wilson. Questions there? All right, we need to start into World War I. World War I is going to be on the test, so either I'm going to assign you to do some independent research. Stephanie will love that. No, I'm kidding. We can finish it. So we'll start today. Friday, we've got to finish it and review some for the test that's coming up. So, all right, we're going to do a little bit of background here of what's going on in Europe. This thing did not just explode out of nowhere. Right? There was underlying problems that have been brewing for a long time. If you've ever been around when your mom was cooking potatoes on the stove with a lid on the pot, and all of a sudden you start bubbles over and runs down the pot, and it's hitting the flames and sizzling and burning. It didn't just happen. There are some things building up there. I've never been around, if you've been around a canner that got too much pressure in it, and a pressure cooker, and explodes all over the place. Right? There were some things going on, and that really is what's going on here in Europe. There were some things that were going on. You could trace them back for a very long time. We won't necessarily do that, but there are some things going on that when we have an assassination of a relatively minor figure, really, in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't a relatively minor person, we get World War I out of that thing. So there's some things in place for that. So, all right, the first thing I want to look at, I've got it labeled Steps Towards War. We'll look at some of the things going on there that laid the groundwork for this thing. So steps towards war, and then the next main point will be the immediate causes. Then we'll look at the assassination and the actual swirl of events. But this is that background of things that was going on there. So, all right, first thing is entangling alliances. We see Europe here split up into two main alliances. And they had treaties with each other and agreements to help each other if somebody attacks them. So two alliances. The Triple Alliance, if you want that one, that was Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. And the other main was the Triple Entente, E-N-T-E-N-T-E. That was France, Great Britain, Russia. We have those two alliances, and then all the other countries of Europe essentially join on. You need those repeated? Okay. Okay, so two main alliance structures in Europe. And what happens here, part of the problem is two people on these two sides get in a scuffle, and the other people then get sucked in as part of their treaty obligations. Some of them didn't come in with their feet dragging. They were kind of excited about this opportunity to beat up their neighbor, but there was these treaty obligations that they were obligated with. Yeah.
Make sure you get those three countries right.
What did I say? Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Now, these are not the sides. Once we get to the war, there's a little bit of rearrangements.
So that's included Czechoslovakia.
Oh,
I didn't know Italy was in there.
yeah,
Italy started on.
yeah. No, that's what I'm saying. There's a little bit of change in once the war starts. Okay, next is colonialism. We have the entangling alliances. That is a significant feature. Colonialism. This had obviously been going on for a very long time in Europe. They were not colonizing Europe. It was European nations colonizing other places. Anybody know a particular place that European nations colonized? I have no more candy, but come on.
What is your question?
Some place that a European nation colonized. You could, I think, literally just about say any place in the world would be right. Maybe not Russia. I mean, really, America. Right? There's the colonies all over. But anyway, at this point, colonies. What?
So you're asking where?
Oh, just about any place, right? Including us. So, all right. Basically, here, all the different major players in Europe had colonies overseas. And it put them at odds with each other. The German colonies, they wanted to keep the British out and the French out, so they had tariffs raised on each other. They had their militaries larger than they typically would be to protect these colonies. We have these European nations pitted against each other, trying to protect their colonies, trying to expand their colonies, etc. All right, so colonialism, that was a factor in this thing. All right, the next factor, or the next step towards war is rivalry over land. And basically, lots of European nations wanted part of some neighboring country. All right. That doesn't bode well for peace. France wanted part of Germany, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there was lots of that issue. The particular issue that becomes important is the Balkan Peninsula down in that area. And the major players of Europe all had some interest in that, either the same ethnic vein as their country or some economic interest. So rivalry over land was a major issue. All right, the fourth one is nationalism. That word gets used lots of places to mean lots of things. Here, it means that there were different ethnic groups that wanted to establish their own country. There were some that were split between two different countries, and they wanted to take all the people that were in that particular ethnic group and make them one country. Austria-Hungary had Poles, Czechs, and Ruthenians in there, and Russia wanted to get anybody that was a Slavic language group and part of Russia. So we had that nationalism in that sense, where these different ethnic groups were wanting to form their own countries. And the last one, and this one we'll take a little bit to think about, look at some examples and things, is a decline in morality. We have Europe here just jettison God and the Bible as a whole. Just a rejection of the Bible, a decline in morality. Hopefully, you don't kill your neighbor only because it's illegal. Hopefully there's something in you that says it violates God's law and the Bible, and that's why I don't kill my neighbor. You throw out the Bible, and really there's no bottom. I mean, who knows what kind of crazy places you can get to. So, decline of morality. Let me, without going into a ton of detail, bounce through a couple hundred years of history and mention some of the philosophy and this rejection of God that takes place here in Europe. And we can in a very real way think of this war as that philosophy bearing some fruit. I mean, we see the results of that. So, all right, the first thing to look at in morality is the Enlightenment. Now, this is going back to the 1700s. 1700 to roughly 1789, if you want that. The basic thought in the Enlightenment was trying to explain all of life just with human reason, explicitly not referenced in the Bible, not acknowledging God or creation, just reason, unaided human reason, explaining everything in life. Guys or girls, you'll agree that men should never be allowed to reason without aid. And that's what we have here, men's unaided human reason. Really, they didn't start with acknowledging we're sinners and the basic principles of the Bible. They just started by reasoning. So why do these people get involved in crime? And why are these people poor and those people are rich? And they try to come up with the answers to these questions without referencing God. And you really get to some crazy solutions if you don't accept the basic ideas. I mean, if you didn't accept gravity, and you look around the world and try to figure out why do things fall down, and you got to come up with some other answer. Well, you could say, well, maybe there's a whole bunch of push down fairies, and their whole life lives, just to push things to the ground. If you're trying to explain it without gravity, you got to come up with some crazy solution. And that's what they were doing. They were trying to explain life and all the problems of life and the crime and war and death and all that without referencing God. And you get to some crazy things. You don't have to write these down, but we get people here like Voltaire and Rousseau. All right, just some crazy philosophers. Those guys are very intimately involved in creating the mentality for the French Revolution there. So, all right, so Enlightenment, very poorly named philosophical movement. All right, the next one is Romanticism. This one's even more poorly named. Well, it does at least involves emotion. Enlightenment there, the focus was on reason. Here it's emotion. What feels good. So here, guys, the girls criticize us for reasoning. This is the girls taking over here. Emotion. What feels good. I'm joking. But really, Romanticism is glorifying emotions and what feels good as opposed to what reason says is right or even what revelation, what God says is right. Emotion. We get lots of things out of this, but one in particular to mention is higher criticism in Germany, this higher critical attitude of the Bible. Instead of reading the Bible and accepting it as true, they read the Bible and with skepticism and looking for flaws and assuming that there's flaws. And we get all kinds of crazy heretics out of this higher critical movement in Germany. It was 1789 to 1814. Sorry, those dates mirror Napoleon, the start of the French Revolution through Napoleon. So, all right, Romanticism. All right, then the last one, the last phase of this is the Age of Progress. Okay, another poorly named. The Enlightenment didn't bring much light, nor did this bring much progress. Right? This is from 1815 through World War I. That 100 years prior to World War I.
What is it called again?
The Age of Progress. All right, and this is my summary of the Age of Progress. The destructive philosophies of the previous two eras come to fruition. All right, so you reject God, base things solely on reason or solely on emotion, and then you get these types of things. All right, so I can give you some examples. You'll know some of these. All right, Charles Darwin and the Origin of the Species, Evolution, 1859, published that book. Evolutionists are, they have to accept evolution by blind faith because there's no evidence for it. But I mean, the alternative is something that they can't accept. I mean, that God made us, and they can't accept that. So they really, it's just complete blind faith in the face of all evidence. So, but anyway, evolution, 1859, communism. 1848, Karl Marx wrote his Communist Manifesto. We get some great phrases there, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. If we ran a college that way, that everybody should pay based upon what they can afford to pay, and you should take classes based upon what you need. By that criteria, we'd have a whole lot of people that didn't work but took a lot of classes. And we'd wonder why the college goes bankrupt. From each according to his ability. Anyway, Karl Marx, the Communist Manifesto, his idea was that all the problems of the world were caused by private property. Instead of sin nature, it was private property. If we strip away private property, then what are you going to steal? I mean, there's nothing to steal. There's no land to steal. There's no cars, etc. So we look at it and think, oh, that's really stupid. And that's right. But this is built on a foundation where there's not God. All right? Those of you in government class, just Jacob, we're reading Animal Farm. All right? That was written to illustrate the result of communist philosophy. So it's also fun in there. They kill lots of animals and pigs and chickens. And good, it's great. All right, so communism, evolution. Let me give a couple other things here. Materialism, the idea that only physical things matter. There's no spiritual, there's no eternal, just what you can touch and taste and feel, and only those types of things. Okay, I think you get the point. This age of progress, we get a lot of these really very ungodly ideas coming out of it. Okay, so that is the rejection of God or decline in morality. We have for a very long time in Europe this rejection of God, rejection of the Bible, and acceptance of these very, very crazy philosophies taking place. All right, let's do one more thing today, and then we'll have to look at more of the war next week or on Friday. Let's look at the immediate causes of the war. Let's look at the things that kick this thing off. And like I said, this is a relatively minor event without that framework in place to catapult it to significance. So, all right, this thing starts on June the 28th, 1914. When Archduke Francis Ferdinand is assassinated. Maybe they didn't like his first name. I don't know. I'm kidding. They kill his wife too. And that is just cause for war. All right, Archduke Francis Ferdinand gets assassinated. Anybody familiar with the Black Hand conspiracy? He went to Sarajevo on a state visit, the official representative from the government, and goes to this luncheon and speaks. And as he's leaving town, there's these lines of people on the streets, and they make multiple attempts to kill him. Some people throw hand grenades and miss the car, and they blow up behind him. Eventually got to a really tight corner, and the car had come almost to a complete stop to get around this really tight corner, and that's where him and his wife get shot and killed. Yes.
What year was that?
June 28th. 1914. So that happens. All right, and from there we have the swirl of events that comes out of it. All right, and over the next several days it comes out that the assassination was planned in Serbia. All right, so we have the heir to the Austrian throne being killed. He wasn't the king. He was in line to be the king. He gets killed in Bosnia but it's planned in Serbia. So we see Austria going after Serbia since they were the ones responsible for this thing. On July 23rd, Austria gives Serbia an ultimatum, just a list of demands since the assassination took place there. And it really was some unreasonable demands in the end. I don't have them here in front of me, but it required Serbia to allow Austria to have people in their country observing things, making sure papers didn't print certain things. Really some unreasonable demands. But anyway, these demands are given on July the 23rd. Serbia doesn't comply with them. So on July the 28th, we have Austria and Serbia going to war. Austria declares war on Serbia. And hopefully thinking, okay, when has there not been a couple small countries in Europe trying to kill each other? And this would have been a minor issue in the end. But that was July the 28th. From there through August the 4th, we get most of Europe sucked into this thing. So on July the 30th, Russia begins to mobilize their troops. They were wanting to support Serbia. So we have Russia. They didn't declare war or anything, but they were getting the machinery in place so that when they declared war, they could act quickly. So they began mobilizing on July the 30th. Germany here, realizing what's happening, on August the 1st, they declare war on Russia. So we have Germany here coming in on the side of Austria, declaring war on Russia. So now all of a sudden it went from Serbia and Austria at war to now Russia and Germany at war. All right, that's enough. Germany, following a long history of solving all the world's problems by killing people. All right. On August the 3rd, they declare war on France. I have to share, kindred with Jacob. Oh, that hurts. All right, on August the 3rd, Germany declares war on France. And that was, they just wanted to do that. France wasn't mobile. They had wanted to do this for a long time. We mentioned the rivalry over land. there had been some bad blood there previous to this. And they had a plan already, and they just decided, well, while we're at war, this is a good time. So August the 3rd, they declare war on France and attack. And then on August the 4th, England comes into this thing. They officially come in to defend Belgium. Germany swung through Belgium to get into France. So they come in defending Belgium's right to be neutral in this thing. Anyway. So we go from July 28th, Serbia and Austria going to war, to August the 4th, Germany, Russia, England, France, Belgium, all these countries sucked into this thing very, very quickly. So like I said, without the framework in place, this would be something that in some obscure history class you might look at, not World War I. So that was the immediate cause of the war. Any questions there? Next class we will run down through the war and talk about America getting involved. So, see you then.